What's going on, guys? It's your host, Daniel DeBrocke of the Stack Strength Podcast. And today I'm sitting down with a friend of mine, Dean Guido. First off, Dean, thanks for coming on, man. Really excited to have you here and chat about this. Can you give a little bit of a background of yourself for maybe the listeners who aren't familiar with you?
Yeah, I will. I was actually caught off guard because I was like, how are you going to intro me? Because I know we were talking before, and like I've done podcasts, and I'm like, I think he's going to pull out the background noise, but I'm just going to see.
I never intro people because I'm just like, they're going to do a better job than me.
Well, I don't even do a good job. Like I've kind of reduced it over the years. And so like the way I've always described it is like I'm an ex college football player, ex teacher turned powerlifter, quit powerlifting. Then I became a trainer, and then I owned a gym, and then COVID happened, and now I work online in nutrition. And somewhere along the line, the lines got blurred. Like I was kind of a bunch of those things at once. Yeah. But now I essentially do online nutrition, and I've changed my Instagram name, so I talk about walking. I guess is probably what I'm going to be most known for, at least right now, which is like totally ridiculous if you think about it. But I'm kind of using that, I guess, name to be ridiculous because everything is ridiculous, and it's like it's my counter argument to everyone else's stupid arguments is I'll just be even stupider than they are, and then hopefully catch some people doing stuff that works and kind of be like the one answer, but like the trolling one answer, but it might actually probably works better. That's kind of where I'm at in terms of
yeah, no, it's funny because so that's actually what we're going to be discussing today actually is walking because I mean, it's funny because it's such an underutilized thing, and so many people like. I guess this kind of goes into the conversation we were having before we even started recording, right? Where it's like when we talk about obesity, when we talk about all these things, and it's like, oh, it's not a choice, it is a choice, and this, that, and the other, and then we just look at different demographics, and it's like, oh, we have a lot of control over our health, you know.
Yeah.
To talk like people can say whatever the fuck they want about genetics and all this stuff, and it's like in 99.999% of cases that stuff is not relevant. It's just not, like I guess it's a little bit too definitive, but you know what I mean. And when I say it's not relevant, I just mean it's not enough to actually stop you from doing anything.
They're barking up the wrong tree a lot. Like I just had a podcast with Eric, and it was like we're talking about these thresholds that genetics and environment will dictate a lot of things.
Yeah.
But like everyone's either talking about exercising more and or eating less. Like it's like they can't combine both. And then no one's actually talking about NEAT. And then there's certain things where I'm like looking at the research, or even when I was essentially figuring out what stuff works the best in practice in nutrition was high flux, and like how do you push that. And I was like, why is no one talking about walking? And I'm like, I kind of remember it. I told my mom she was completely stupid for listening to Oprah and doing 10,000 steps. Like I did that. I'm like, why would you walk when you could lift? Like I'm a power lifter. I played football. I'm like, you fucking get in the gym. And then somewhere along the line, I had a brain and I started thinking, but it's just like, I'm looking at this and no one's talking about like probably one of the simplest interventions you can do. But the simplest intervention everyone thinks is like, well, I'll just fucking not eat that much and starve myself and or go crush Peloton for hours on end. And then they get results initially and then they can't maintain it and then they're fucked. And like, that's kind of where everyone ends up. And I'm like, why is that the first solution to this thing? And that's kind of where like we have a lot more control, but I think people don't understand the actual options because they've been fed simple in another form where I just don't think it's that effective when you look at environment. Because controlling food, you absolutely can. Like we can talk about that, but I think most people just won't. Because if they did, they would have already fucking done it. So that's kind of where, again, you kind of find that line. But again,
Well, that's I guess we're gonna go off on this tangent anyway. So I just feel like a lot of the times the conversation around health and fitness is really, as much as and I'm going to take a shot at the evidence-based community because I think they're just as bad as this as all of these quote unquote charlatans who are peddling like keto powder and all this other bullshit, because it's like they have just as equally, and again I'm speaking broadly, not any particular individual, because there's obviously a lot of incredible people in there, but I just hear so many conversations that are very one-sided, very disingenuous, some people just can't lose weight because they're genetics. And it's like, okay, but like when you say that, what message are you sending to the broader public? There's no
Yeah.
other you're like, some people have a thyroid issue, some people have this, but then there's no context as to, oh, by the way, this represents 0.5% of the population, so you're probably not that. It's like it's a very, I don't know, it's a very misleading message. And I understand why, because people are like, hey, this is a complex subject. Weight loss, yes, it's just like eat less, move more. Yes, it's correct. But then it's like, how do you get people to do that? How do you get them to sustain that? And that's where it becomes more nuanced, talking about the things that you were talking about, like
Mhm.
lifestyle, like, social factors, like all of these different things. But then when we don't have an accurate conversation, like even that question, is obesity a choice? That's a dumb question. And if you ask a dumb question, you're going to get a dumb answer. It's too reductionist. You can only answer yes or no, and therefore you can't say that yes, it's a choice, because there are things outside of your control. So you're forced to say no, it's not a choice, even though that's a very inaccurate answer. You know?
In where like like people don't have that question in the fucking jungle. Like you know what I mean? It's like they're not even having that conversation. So it's just like, and then like it's so complicated. But that's why I don't even like having that discussion because it's fucking stupid on both ends. Like,
Oh man,
it's like
I've
we're
been
talking
trying to
about a
get
micro, like we're
towards
talking about a macro problem with tons of fucking. And this is what I was talking with Eric, which he's one of the evidence-based people I do love because
Helms.
he looks at he looks
Helms,
at all of it,
yeah,
and then he's rational, but then he's also gets the micro, gets the macro, and he's like, yeah, I don't have the answer. And I think the point is that everyone wants to have the answer, like which is kind of where my Instagram goes to is like I'm peddling the answer, but I totally say all the time like I'm willing to be wrong on this, and I think that that's
yeah,
where you get to fighting, and then you can get evidence to support it a lot of times. And what sucks with the evidence is a lot of the studies only look at one piece or one diet or comparing keto to this shit, and it's like that's what I mean. I'm like looking at all this stuff, and that's why I liked high flux because when I started looking at what it was it kind of they didn't describe it that well, but it looked at a lot of things. It's like, well, here's like a few variables we can put as one and then see what it does. And like no one wants to
yeah,
actually have that conversation. They just want to be experts in one thing. Kind of like how the industry split between strength training and nutrition coaches. It's like you
yeah.
people do a little bit of both, but then no one talks about NEAT, and the NEAT will make a resurgence for a couple months, and then it'll go away. And it's just like, why did no one think about like talking about all this stuff?
Yeah.
Uh, it, again, is it a choice? Is it not? It's like, well, does it fucking matter? It's
Yeah.
the question.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just an annoying question, to be honest. But I mean, even for a little while there, I think what was your handle, like Be More Amish or something like that? Which is an allusion to the walking, because Amish communities, for anyone who is familiar with that data.
You want to talk about the research. The reason why, funny story, I took that off is my wife's in like, she works for the city where I'm at. But anyway, she's in like D&I works. Anyways, long story short is she knows like what you can and can't say and like what's appropriate and whatnot. Anyways, and she was like, that's cultural appropriation. And I was like, obviously, my first reaction is like, fuck off. Even though I was like, absolutely right, but I'm not conceding on this. And she's like, you should watch this video. And I watched the video. I'm like, oh, fuck, she's right. But my argument was like the Amish, like they don't use technology, so like they can't even, they're not even going to see the name, so like is it hurting anyone? Anyways, I took that off. But the idea behind it was based on that study, but like I like to look at stuff in practicality, and I think that
Yeah.
that's where looking at a population level is kind of cool because you can see a bunch of those variables work. Like, is obesity a choice? Like they're not even asking that, they're just living. And I like to see stuff where people are just existing. And we had this conversation with Eric Helms looking at Spain versus like North America. It's like vastly different fucking things. So there's a million things, but like there's not that many overweight people. But with the Amish, there was literally like, I say shredded, but they're very low body fat percentage. And when they looked at what worked, essentially they work physical labor all day, and their step count was, I think, like 17,500 steps, which is fucking nuts when like the CDC average is, I think, around like 3,500 or 4,500, but
Yeah.
very, very low comparatively. And then you kind of look, I was like, oh, this is a high flux study because the Amish eat fucking like 3,300 calories, I think was kind of the average when you looked at another study. But it's like, so they eat like American averages, and then they walk way more and they do physical labor, and they didn't have an obesity problem. It's like, well, I want to look at that. Like, why aren't we looking at that? And it's kind of like that's where it started. Was again, they just basically do more work. You can call it powerlifting or you call it walking, but they combined a bunch of stuff and they put more work, and they were essentially in high flux, and they didn't have an obesity problem because their environment dictated, partially because they needed to make money for to live and all that stuff, but they didn't have that choice. They just existed, which I think is cool because they're not thinking about dieting. They're not thinking about obesity.
Yeah.
They're probably not even thinking about health, to be honest, or their food choices. Like those are usually the people who are the most successful. If I've known anything with dieting, is like if you can get to that point, and no one's at that point. And I would say, like as a whole, industry at least, we're not doing that well. If obesity numbers are going up and disease numbers are going up and diabetes numbers are going up, and the fitness industry has made the most money as it's ever made and has been the biggest it's ever been, to me that's like, hey, maybe like it's not working, but it works here. And like, what is the reason for that? And that's kind of where that started, was like, maybe they just fucking be Amish. And I believe that. Like obviously there's some nuance there, but like I would, if people were more Amish, it would be way better. If they had medical health care and stuff too, because they just didn't there. That's also
Well, the thing is, it's like, sure, you can come back and be like, okay, well, it's not that simple and it is more nuanced, but it's like, okay, sure, it might be more nuanced in some contexts. But if you were to adopt some of those general lifestyle habits, you're solving like 85% of the issues for people,
absolutely.
And it's like, that's not significant. It's like, oh, because it's not 100%. It's like, that's a freaking great solution,
Mm.
And the difficult thing is that, when you talk to people about this, so for instance, I'll use myself as an example, right? Like I've been super skinny, I've been morbidly obese, I've been shredded, I've been jacked, and then I'm like where I am right now, where I'm 265 and I'm getting leaner. I'm still a little bit fluffy, but I'm IFBB pro-ish. So that's the road I'm on.
You're like a gym rat now, like
Yeah.
a general population gym rat.
And so, but I look at my lifestyle before, right? And when I was fighting, I was training 6 hours a day, and worked in a restaurant, like fine dining. So I was working crazy hours, and I was just eating whatever the fuck I could. Like I would literally have like cake every day and like sweets and just anything I could to keep my weight up, because I was 165, at 130, 183 centimeters. So like that's not very much. But I was eating literally more than I am right now at like almost double that body weight. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
And so it was just like I'm looking at that lifestyle, and then I remember after that when I went to work in corporate for a while, and then my other jobs, and it's like you tell someone like, hey, you might have to make some significant lifestyle choices, and they'll just be like, oh, that's no, just not going to do that. Like it's just off the table. And they're like, well, that's not so easy, like not everyone has your lifestyle. And they'll point at me, not everyone works from home and is da 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 da. And I'm like, I wasn't like this. Like I worked for 10 years to get to this position where I could do these things. And it's like, does that mean that you need to be a coach? Does that mean that you need to train all this? It's like, no. But if you want to just sit here and say, hey, I have, that's too much, then it's like, okay, well then you have no right to complain, because it's not like no one is suggesting, hey, you need to go from 0 to this to this to this tomorrow. It's just like, hey, maybe try going for a walk today. How long? I don't know. If you've never walked before, maybe 15 minutes. And maybe that's enough. And then 15 minutes turns to 30 minutes, turns to 45, turns to an hour. Maybe that turns to also going to the gym. Maybe that turns to also maybe being a little bit more considerate about, the foods you're eating and all. And it's just like, it just snowballs, And so that's actually, I guess, something that I wanted to talk to you about is like, how do you go about that process of, initiating and then the iterations that come after that?
Like as a whole, like in terms of messaging on Instagram, being a total complete dumb fuck and saying do more, and then eventually they'll get the point that walking is helpful. And from a foundational point, very similar to what you're saying, is like I understand that environment's going to dictate a lot of times for people. And let's just say like people don't like they're busy, like is usually a quotation busy, but like usually people are busy, have kids, yada yada yada. Again, I'm looking at what's the highest leverage piece, and I always land on walking. Because again, if I had a choice, I call it pick your poison. But if between output and input, I'm going to bet the farm, like if people were left to their own devices, they're not going to fucking eat less forever. Like, and some people will, but every time I get that answer, it's fitness professionals. So again, fuck them. Yeah. Fuck you. But no, I think the way I go about it generally is especially I work for a nutrition company, and again, it's macro based, and you can coach however you want and do whatever you want. But the way I convince people a lot of times is I don't highlight the fact that it's a food first strategy. I think food's important, and but people are coming for food strategies, and I like to work on output strategies first, and almost say like, you have to earn the right for it to be about food a lot of times. Because what I find a lot of times is people who go after just food and lose weight in any context or whatever, try to get leaner or whatever, is like they always use the hammer that's biggest is food. And I don't like to go after that. I would rather do a very small, I guess, calorie cut. Obviously, audit, see where they're at. It might be a big, depending on the person. But again, a smaller calorie cut and raise steps while keeping exercise the same. And so obviously that doesn't work well if they don't exercise. So obviously, can you find exercise? And if the answer is no, then can we get steps? And if the answer is no, then we go after food. But if we can use that sequencing, I like to get people consistent on exercise, whatever that is, 2 or 3 times a day. And then with walking, what's the highest amount you're going to get? Obviously, start small. Like you said, 15-minute walks, whatever. I think there's a fucking million things you can do. But find out, what are you realistically going to do? Not the, I told you get 12,000 steps, fuck that guy. But like, what the fuck are you going to get? And so if it's 7,000, 8,000, 4,000, whatever, that would be horrible. I would probably suggest higher than that, but get that consistent and then go after food in that order, more or less, because most people believe in food and exercise. So I can get them on exercise being good. Walking is a little bit harder, but if I can get that consistent, then we can just use food as the knob. And or if results stop coming, choose. Do you want to walk more or do you want to eat less? As opposed to starting from eat less. And so I kind of go in that pick your poison route. If you can keep exercise the same, then you pick your poison. And then they can choose whatever the fuck they want. And you can have that conversation because, again, will they make lifestyle changes? The answer might be no. And then you'll be like, hey, motherfucker, like you have to eat way less. And like, that's the reality. And then now they understand reality and they can choose their poison. And at that point, I don't care. Do I think that they're going to be successful cutting food? More than likely not. I think it'll have to be part of the equation if they want to get really shredded. But I think you can exist somewhere along that lower threshold of body fat percentage, depending on your genetics. I think you can exist there if you can get enough output while eating a reasonable amount. Again, getting there is the hard part, but that's how I would scaffold it a lot of times, which doesn't get projected on my Instagram. But I also get paid to coach, so like, I'm not giving all the fucking secrets away.
You are now.
You can't message that in a simple term. I think that's the problem, is like nuance and contextual nature of this thing. You can't fucking describe that on Instagram. And so anyone who like says my shit's dumb, it's just like, yeah, like it is dumb on Instagram, but so is everything. Like no one's actually doing a good job of messaging.
Yeah. Well, it's like saying, well, a car is basically just wheels, an engine, and some sort of supporting frame. And it's like, okay, cool. Now can you go and build a car? It's like, fuck no, I can't build a car. Just
eat
because
calorie
do that.
Eating calorie deficit that's my biggest one. But it's just like, okay, that's not any like, and this is so another rant. But again, eat less or calorie deficit or whatever. I think my messaging better. I think that if we were to bet and we had the same person and I told like, and we're talking, we watch them for the rest of their life. If it was like between be in a calorie deficit and or eat less or walk more, I guarantee, like I guarantee, but I'm betting on the person who gets their movement up or their NEAT up to like a reasonable level. I bet they'll be more successful long term, 100%. I don't think people are going to change their environment because they get the answer that they gave you or whatever. It's like, I'm not going to make any drastic life changes. I think eventually they will get there if they walk more. I think if they cut food out, they'll revert back every single time because like they have too many food choices. Unless they move to the jungle, if they're not going to move out of their situation, zero chances they eat less forever. Zero fucking chances.
Yeah, especially when you look at like the actual impact that each decision has, because they're not equivalent, right? Like if you get someone to walk a little bit more, that might present like a time constraint, which is a different type of constraint than maybe a social constraint. If someone is going out for business lunches on a regular basis, or just if they like, oh, girls' night or whatever, they have the beers with a guy every single week, or you know what I mean? Those things are super important to them. And if it's like, hey, do you want to give this up or do you want to go for an hour walk every day? They're gonna be like, I really don't want to go for an hour walk, but that's way less shitty than, not going out with my boys. And so it's like, all right, cool. And so maybe you start there. And I tend to agree with you like entirely, because especially long term, when you get someone active, they just start to feel better. And that becomes much more integrated as a lifestyle versus restricting food. Restricting food isn't a lifestyle. It's just a shitty kind of way to go about things,
And like it comes with benefits.
Really
like
limiting. Yeah.
Like physiologically, like they're gonna have better health markers, like to a degree. But what comes with that a lot of times is energy availability problems, which again, we'll call it adaptive thermogenesis, but all the shitty stuff, like they get hungry, they reduce all the other stuff. Like the less and less you get with food, the shittier and shittier it gets. A lot of times, even just psychologically telling someone they have to eat less, they're already like, fuck this shit. With walking, I have yet to find a negative other than time. Sometimes it's a little bit like if there's an injury, obviously that can be difficult. No one's really like saying their walks are shitty. There's a lot more upside, I find, with a lot less shittiness. And I believe you can overdo the walking. I can tell a story later. I've 100% done that, and you were a fighter, so I mean, there's definitely an energy availability problem at some point if you don't eat enough or you don't recover enough. But like generally, unless you're crazy, it's not
reaching that. Who's
I did.
doing that side?
I did.
But exactly, but it's like, are you someone who
people
really
do it.
struggles? Are you someone who really struggles with weight or fitness?
No,
You're
I'm the
only
dumbass one that take it to the end.
Exactly. You're only going to get that out of the overly obsessive people who, it's like, okay, well, they don't need walking. They'll get that from anything.
No, exactly. Fighters are another good example. Like they'll do it, but again, they usually do it through fighting and under eating. But like that's what I mean. If you're not that population, like, and again, the biggest argument against mine is like, well, I'm an athlete. I do this. I'm like, hey, my messaging isn't for you. Like, should you walk a little bit more? Probably, if you look at the research, you probably should hit minimum threshold. But outside of that, like, this isn't for you. Just go eat more food and don't like get red ass. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, basically, it's funny. And one of the things that I like too, as well, about what you said was, you kind of have all of these different dials, and you're not hitting all the dials simultaneously, because then it's like, you've played your cards. That's it. You've got nothing to do down the road when you start to stagnate. Whereas you're like, hey, let's try and get some steps in. You start doing that, and then maybe you look at an exercise intervention, and then the food is last, and then it really changes people's perspective because, like you mentioned, there is this sort of food focus where it's like, if you tell someone they're dieting, it's going to be harder versus if you tell them to intermittent fast or have some sort of time restricted feeding, and then you're like, hey, you can eat ad libitum within these periods. Almost always they're going to end up eating less just because it's harder to eat more food in a constrained time set, right? But psychologically, you're not taxed because there is no real restriction. It's like, eat whatever the fuck you want. Just make sure that you only start eating after 1 p.m. or whatever, and then you stop at 8
and
p.m.
like I understand that like that modeling isn't going to work for everyone, but that's how I like to do my model. But it's more because it's a reaction to, I guess, the norm, so to speak. And like if the norm changed or the communication line, somehow people got that my way is better, they wouldn't come to me with this other way. But yeah, it's like they enter the matrix. The second they like their narrative is flipped upside down, they're like, what the fuck? And if it works within the first 2 weeks, like I got them. Like if it doesn't work, usually they're eating too much. So, but again, a lot of times I don't get that because they'll be like, well, this guy's not telling me to eat that much less. Like my last coach had me on 1,200 calories. I'm on 1,500 calories. What the hell is going on? That's usually the I guess battle I have, and that gets turned upside down if I can get them to trust me. And usually my logic is pretty good. Like I'll explain things and have some articles and stuff. But once they're there, again, now the narrative is different. That's usually how I would do it, and usually it's just scaffolding it with doing food last. Even though, like, I know for a fact we're going to have to utilize food at some point, like you said. It's just that once you've exhausted that, I find a lot of times the second you start doing food psychologically, it's already fucked. And then when you actually get to the effects of what eating less food over time does, like you run out of runway really fast, even though it works. Except for the people who can do it the longest are the crazy people or the bodybuilders or the people who want to get really shredded and or the people who are really athletic and or are like professional athletes and stuff. They can do that amount of output and do it because they're disciplined, because they have an end goal that's usually around a sport or some weird body image thing. Like, again, they can do that. Generally, though, like that's not most people. So I don't like to go after that if I don't have to. Eventually we get there, but we eventually get there and then it works way better because we haven't looked at it. And the benefit to that is in maintenance, they don't have to do as much work because now because everyone thinks maintenance is we'll just increase calories and everything will be good. It's like, no, usually what happens is no one actually has weight loss maintenance. It's probably the worst done job in the nutrition industry, period. I don't have to deal with that because their calories are already higher and their flux is already higher. We're just increasing calories and possibly increasing output a little bit, but they've already been output focused, which makes maintenance fucking easy because they're already doing the thing that is in the research determined to be weight loss maintainers, which is usually 12,000 steps, I think was the total, but like somewhere over 60 minutes of extra exercise, yada, yada, yada. They've already done that. So now they just have to attach the food piece to it and they're good. Again, I don't tell people that initially, but that's the way I'm going, is I'm going with the end in mind. How can we start there as opposed to try to get people to walk more and lift more after they've already had a severe calorie cut for fucking a year? Like, probably not going to happen.
Yeah, and there's a couple things you said in there that I really like, and I guess I just kind of want to highlight again is like the first thing you mentioned was um, getting buy-in, right? And I think that that's something that's really important as well. And it's also, I don't want to say easy, but to some degree it is easy if the individual, which most people have by the time they're seeking out a nutrition coach, they have dieted before, probably several times, and had a very mixed experience. And so you come to that, or they come to you and they expect, hey, we're going to cut calories. They expect the same old, right?
Yeah.
Because that's what's happened. That's what worked for them in the past, but then they couldn't maintain it, or that just didn't work. But that's kind of the common narrative around weight loss. And then all of a sudden you're like, hey, has this happened to you? It almost ends up being like an infomercial, like, have you experienced this before? Try Lupron, or I don't know what that word even is. Actually, I think that's a drug. But
It sounded legit, so whatever.
yeah, I think it's a drug. But at any rate, it's like, try this, right? And so you say something that's kind of, to some degree, a little different. It's a little novel. It's a new perspective, and it does offer some really um, unique, but also very logical explanations for their experience. It's like, hey, you've tried calorie cutting a bunch. You've done all of this, and we've got these two sides of the energy balance equation. How much have you really tackled that? And have you tackled it through something like walking? Because, like, if you look at like trying to get someone to do cardio or resistance training, it's like that's hard. It is hard. But
Yeah,
I don't care who the fuck you are. You can walk.
agreed.
And it might be annoying, but it's like, dude, toss in a podcast, toss in some music, call your friend, and just chat. Or even like watch a movie on your fucking phone as if you're walking on the treadmill, right? So it's like there's ways to keep entertained, and it's very low barrier to entry. Pretty much anyone can do that.
Easy
And
to
and
track
then you
too.
start, huh?
Easy to track is my big one. It's like
Very
there's a lot
easy
of
to
things
track.
that people don't track right
Very
with
easy to
food or
track.
exercise. Like they suck at it. Steps, it already does it for you pretty accurately.
Yeah.
Like you do shit.
And that's such a huge benefit in my mind. So I actually don't program cardio for many people at all. Like, it's very rare because of exactly what you said. I really like the consistency of it. It's like, hey, get X amount of steps. And then I can look at their steps, I can look at their sleep, I can look at their water and their food intake. And then you look at their weight trend and you're like, yes, that makes sense. Or if they go up a little bit, you're like, hey, don't worry about it. You see how your steps over here were a little off? You see these foods, you're super high in sodium and your water is really high. It's really easy to explain fluctuations and kind of get them to just chill out a little bit. And I find that is a huge way of getting buy-in, because it's not the same old. It's funny because it is it's not new, but it is new in terms of like actually being accepted. Because as much as people talk about, oh, maintenance is so important, or walking is so important, fucking very few people actually do it.
Well, and we're
People
not
just
talking
people
about the
just
same
mouth
thing.
off about it, but no one does it.
I think like I had a post. My post was pretty stupid yesterday, if I do say so myself. But it was like get 2 or 3x, and I didn't say who I was talking to, and I basically had some and they were joking because they know my thought process. But like,
Oh yeah, I saw that. I saw that.
I mean, 25,000 steps, and in my head, I'm like, I'm not talking to you. I'm talking like generally. But again, the reaction to the normal action. But again, everyone's like, I think walking is cool and it's making being popular, but again, mass has been talking about it. I don't think it's that popular. I think it's gonna go away, and people, like, again, I don't understand why the resistance to it, probably because it's time intensive. But my point is like, when we're talking about walking more, I'm not talking about like a 15-minute walk, even though it's a good stepping stone when you're coaching people and yada yada yada. Like, I get that, I do that, but like, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about fucking much higher, like double to triple what the CDC averages. And like, most people don't want to hear that. They want the lowest thing, which I had this rant with Eric's podcast, is like the research came out, the cumulative review or whatever, on with the health markers. It's like at 7,000 steps, you get the most gains. It's like 48% all cause mortality and cardiovascular disease. You pick that up by getting to the threshold as a 7,000 steps. Everyone took that as 7,000 steps. I'm like, yeah, it's a great fucking starting point. But like, again, that's most people are eating too much to even exist there. Like, they need to do more. And I think
Yeah.
everyone wants what's the minimum. And so I just be super outlandish to say it's more, but it is more. And it's not that hard to do. And again, in terms of picking up flux or weight, which no one else ends up talking about, is like it's generally more than 7,000 steps in practice, mostly because our food environment has changed drastically. Is 7,000 steps great? Yeah. But if you want to like actually have the other health markers from not being obese, I don't think 7,000 is enough. Is it enough for certain populations, certain people? Absolutely. But the people talking about it are the fitness trainers. Yeah, for them it's enough. But like for their trainers, they're like ended up putting it down to like the minimum threshold. And I guess that's my issue with the walk more thing is it ends up being how can I walk the least amount but it be more? This is the point is like drive your fucking need as high as possible within the realm of your life so that you have a good fucking tool. 7,000 steps is not that's like the starting point in my mind, if that makes sense.
Yeah, like I sort of see 8,000 as like the absolute bare minimum for
Yeah,
like general aerobic health.
correct.
Um, and for me, like when it comes to weight loss, I'm usually within the 10 to 15,000. That's usually
Absolutely.
where I put people. And then if you have to go beyond that, that's when time does become like a legitimate constraint. And that's when I'm like, okay, now let's start maybe looking at cardiovascular training or altering your calories or something along those lines for sure. So,
17,000 plus for vacations. This is like a insider trick. But usually, like I'm serious. Like I have most people walk between 8 and 12,000 steps. But
yeah.
my people who have lost a lot of weight and have maintained it, they're 12,000 plus. It's actually right in line with the research, which is fucking crazy because that was observational. And then I'm looking, like, oh, that makes sense because I've seen it. But vacations, if you can get like 15,000 to like that Amish level, most people can't like they can eat whatever they want on vacation to an extent, obviously, but they'll come back usually weight neutral. But that's a lot more logistics of time. But if you're on vacation, you got the time. If you're in Mexico, you can get the steps, and then you can be an asshole. So
Yeah.
you can be Amish. That's kind of where goes the Amish because they eat like assholes and they're shredded. But that's 17,000 plus up to like 25,000 plus. You're covered. It's just you're probably not going to do that because that's like fucking hours. I think it's like 5 hours, maybe six.
No, 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 no.
No, it was 6,000 an hour. So what is that? Yeah, it's like, but like 5 hours cumulative over a day. Like that includes just moving generally, not like a 5 hour walk, but like neat
Yeah.
wise.
I yeah, a lot of the times, if you do have a client who goes on vacation, yeah, they'll either come back weight neutral. A lot of the times they might even come back like a little under
Yeah,
because it's like, oh, we were swimming and playing at the beach and we were seeing the sights and walking around and we went to the marina and then we went here and then we went there. And it's
cruises.
like I was expecting to gain weight because I was eating all this pasta while I was in Italy. And I'm like, yeah, but you would go on these like long adventures. And I say the exact same thing. I'm like, look, if you're on vacation, go on vacation.
Yeah,
Don't worry about training. Like, take that time actually off. Don't half-ass your vacation and half-ass your workouts. Just go and be there. So the only thing that I want you to do is just generally be active. Go for walks, go sightseeing, do stuff like that. I was like, if you can do that, I'm really happy. If you don't do that, that's fine. 'Cause you're still on vacation,
yeah,
you know. And then 9 times out of 10, they end up exactly how you said. They're like, yeah,
yeah.
they end up remaining weight neutral if you have those conversations.
Yeah, well, because it's an easy thing to do, and that's where it's like the reason why I like walking is 'cause, like that situation is a perfect example. Obviously, if it can bleed into normal life, that's helpful. Usually, it's an eye-opening moment. Like, what the fuck happened? I'm like, oh, you know how like I told you should walk more? You ended up walking twice as much as usually it worked. Go figure. But the point is like you can. That's a strategy that even if you didn't track that, again, the foundation is like be more active, get your output up. It doesn't have to look like the gym. It can just look like usually the sentiment I use is like walking more, but even being more active is more memories, which is like super. I'm a power lifter at heart. It pains me to say that, but it's like they end up having more memories. Like you go to Spain and whatever, you walk around, you see everyone, they're just enjoying stuff, but they're generally active in it. No one's really regretting it. Usually people regret going on the treadmill and looking at the gym wall. Like that's
Yeah.
sucks. But you don't have to do that. You could do other shit.
Well, that's the funny thing too about like sort of gym culture, right? It ends up being like very kind of like this funnel, right? Where there's only a select few things that you can really pull from,
Yeah,
and it's like, okay, gyms have been around for like how long? In terms of like being publicly accepted, it's like what 50 years,
yeah.
maybe. It's
A
like,
little bit longer. Yeah, like yeah.
and it's like people have been pretty healthy throughout life. In fact, the further back you go, the healthier they were from like speaking from a body fat
Yeah.
percentage perspective, right? And it's like, yeah, some people can afford food, or whatever, but it's like people are also really damn active. Like we didn't have the internet, so we didn't really have office jobs. We didn't have all this tech stuff that was, like making things easier. You couldn't order food to your house,
It's harder.
like everything was just a lot harder. It's like, why don't, you just go back to playing games, play frisbee. It's like, when was the last time, I don't know if you were an ex-footballer. So it's like, would you need motivation if your buddies were like, "Hey, you want to go play football
No.
this weekend?" You'd be like, "Fuck yeah, let's do that. That sounds awesome." And then you've got like, what, a couple hours of running around, playing football, being athletic, being explosive. And it's like, that is fantastic exercise, but not for 1 second are you ever going to chart that as like, "Oh, I was really good. I got my exercise in." You're just going to be like, "Hey, I had a blast with my homies," and that's it. You know,
That's part of the problem with counting this
all
stuff.
those things.
Is like I hate that it gets reduced a lot of times. Like, what can I do and how can I track it? Because I agree. I think like again, that's where I at least like walking because it's like it does the tracking for you. You don't have to you think about it, but it like, gamifies it. But yeah, like it sucks that we have to get to that point where like that's not like we have to do that and like think about doing it where like you should just do it for its own sake, which is if your life is structured around that. Again, you can talk about privilege and you're busy and all this stuff, but I think like if you add more of that stuff in, I think there's a huge upside to that, and that's again not a sexy message, but it's I have to reduce it to walking, exercising, which sucks, but
Yeah. Well,
like
if I'm
that's
being
gonna be better.
I don't I have seldom actually met someone who legitimately didn't have time.
Yeah.
Like, everyone says that, but it's bullshit.
It's
Like,
coders. So the only people I've met is
you
like
know
coders with families or like people in tech jobs. But that's where walking treadmills come into effect. But again, super specific, hyper specific
yeah,
situation. There's ways, obviously. Again, if that's your life, and let's just say you literally don't have time, then yeah, fucking eat less. Like done. Like then everything else is right. Like you just starve yourself and you'll lose
yeah,
weight, but it's gonna suck. Drink a lot of caffeine. Um, do cocaine. And like you know what I mean? Like it's just, but like so there is a way. It's just like walking could
yeah,
just be easier. Um,
yeah.
walking treadmills are helpful in terms of
It's just it's so rare that people actually, like, fall into these narratives, "Oh, I don't have time," and then just basic needs analysis, and you're like, "Okay, tell me what your day looks like." "Oh, man, I work so many hours." "Okay, when do you start work?" "This time." "When do you get off work?" "Oh, like 4." "Oh, it's an 8-hour workday." "Okay. What else do you do?" "Oh, well, then I gotta go home and make dinner." "Okay, how long does that take?" About 2 hours." "Okay. How long does it take you to commute home?" "About 30 minutes." "Okay, so now we're at, like, you ended work at 4 and now it's 6:30.
yeah.
Now
Yeah.
what?" "Well, then I'm just exhausted." "Okay, what do you do then?" "And then I just watch TV for the rest of the night." "Okay, what time do you go to bed?" 10:30. "Okay, so 4 hours of just watching TV?" It's like, what would make you feel less exhausted? Going out for a walk. Time is not an issue for you. You know,
No, and it's like it
like,
sucks that and like that's the shitty part is like their perception of it is it is. But like the reality is like it is gonna be hard for you. Like, and that's the point. But it's gonna be less damaging overall. I think that's the communication problem is like to kind of convey that. You have to kind of go through that process with people. And that's where it's like I still haven't figured out the solution. But that's kind of where I'm being stupid with the walk more because at least if they can see results or they can see that messaging, they'll ask themselves that question. You know what I mean? Like, I do have enough time. You're right. Like, I want people to come to their own conclusions because I find a lot of times if you scream at them, like they won't get it, but I'll still do it. And I feel like if the messaging is even more, I guess, I don't even, it's
okay,
just, like even crazier. Like, I always look at Liver King, which is you can see with my name, it's King, but it's like people follow that. Like, it's almost like you need to have a stupid fucking message that's so big and stupid that they'll believe it and they'll do it because that's usually what works. So I'm just trying to do an ethical version of that.
yeah,
Um, and so I need them to come to their own conclusions though and ask themselves that question
yeah,
because no one really like if they don't come up with the solution themselves, a lot of times it won't work. Like some things that's not true, but generally if you tell someone that they're not that busy, like they'll be like, fuck this motherfucker. Even though like it's true, I get a pass because I have a kid. I can be like, I'm fucking busy too. I have a kid. And they're like, oh fuck. Now what? You see
yeah,
my in round now.
yeah, yeah. No, and it's funny too because, like, when you look at people and then you look at their excuses, and here's one thing that I used to do. I don't really find I do it too much anymore, but like I would during sort of the intake process, I'll talk to people and be like, "Okay, so, like, tell me a little bit about your life, where your stress level's at, what's going on with this, what's your relationship with food, and you just kind of do the whole shebang as you normally would, right? And then you start talking about potential avenues that you're going to take. And you're like, okay,
Mhm.
so based on everything you've told me, based on your goals, based on your time constraints and all of this sounds like it's probably going to be the most appropriate approach to start you off on. And here's the reasons why. Does that make sense? Yes. Do you have any concerns about that? Does this sound like something you can adhere to? Yes, 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 yes. Okay, cool. And then sometimes, not always, but sometimes it'd get pushed back.
Mhm.
And it would be like, this is the starting point, you know, the easiest you can be, and I'm already getting pushed back.
Mhm.
And so sometimes when they would do that, I'd be like, they're like, well, I don't know if I could do that. I'd be like, okay, um, I don't think that you're gonna do it then. I'm probably not the coach for you.
Yeah.
And it's like that's it's kind of like a sales thing. It's like what is it, the takeaway or whatever. And very quickly they're like, wait, what? And I'm like, well, like realistically, this isn't about me. Like, I don't care how slow you go. I don't care what process you take. I'm not trying to force keto or paleo or like I really don't care. I just care about you getting results and you doing it in a sustainable way, right? But if this is the starting point and you're already kind of saying, hey, no, and we've explored it, you've said you can do it, you've said you think you'd enjoy it, like you've agreed to this, you put the intervention in. I just made suggestions and you said yes. And now I'm already getting some pushback on this. I really don't think that this is actually something that you want, you know? And I'm not looking to take your money for something that you're just not going to utilize. So I think it's really important that you just sit down and actually consider, like, hey, am I willing to take these trade-offs? And usually that just sort of like level of honesty with them is like, oh shit, it's kind of a smack in the face because they're like, oh yeah, I'm being an asshole. And they're like,
Yeah.
no, you're right, I'll do it. And there are some times where like I'll be a little bit more dickish about it, but I think I can because that's just my personality.
Yeah.
So like I remember one of my athletes, she's always like, oh my God, like this is an elite athlete, like, very fucking strong person. And I'll tell her I want her to go up and weight on like for her top single. And she's like, no, that was so heavy already. Like, are you kidding me? I felt like I was being crushed. I'm like, I don't care. Go up. That's not what I told you
Mhm.
to do. I told you to hit this weight. I don't care what it felt like. It looked great. I want you to go up. Like, but it felt so heavy. I'm like, your sport is lifting heavy shit. Do you expect it to feel light? She's like, no. And I'm like, so throw the fucking weight on. And she'll be like, seriously, like you're ruthless. And I'm like, I don't care. Stop being a bitch. Throw the fucking weight on.
Mhm.
But I can do that with her because I've built up that relationship, and she's won a lot of of like medals and stuff like that because of that coaching relationship. She's also a very good friend of mine. You know what I mean? So it's like
Yeah.
sometimes you just have to fucking shoot straight with people and be like, "Yo, you're just being a bitch." Like,
Well, and that's where,
you know,
like in my ideal world, like those are the people I'm coaching. Like, honestly, I know some people are like, I love the challenge of work with general population and helping the world and stuff. But I was like, I just like winning, and like this is where like, you get in the argument of like, is tracking bad and blah 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 blah. It's like
yeah, yeah, yeah,
in my ideal world, I'm working with someone with like a pretty crazy goal, and we're just gonna crush it. And the good thing about tracking is it fucking works. Now,
yeah,
does it work for Sally who works in the office and yada yada yada? Like, no, you probably have to kind of do the softer like spectrum piece of like
yeah,
more. But like that's where the, your crowd or who you're coaching, and I think that's important too because I talk about something that works, obviously, but it's not going to work for some people. And like I love powerlifters and strength athletes because again, their goal isn't about their fucking life, like whether like you fucking do this or like you're not going to get it. It's awesome. Like I love that because it's like then you can actually use the science and use what works, even if it's observational, and just fucking crush it. And I think that what that does is allows you to figure out how you're going to utilize that for general populations where again that's probably the harder thing. But yeah, like again, I love that you can have that coaching relationship because that's that. I think Lisa Lewis talks about it, but it's that moment where like you kind of have that push and pull at the coaching relationship, and then you're like, you're not ready. And they're, what? I'm not ready. I am ready, and then you kind of
yeah,
move past that barrier. But that's usually the point of inflection with anyone you coach, where you'll get to that point, and that's where the breakthrough is. And I guess my breakthrough is usually I can get them on. This works because this is so vastly different. That conversation we had earlier, and they get results, and then we've crossed that barrier.
yeah,
I love strength athletes though, because you don't have to have that conversation. You can just have the like, you fucking do this or it's not going to work. You ask for these things. Like there isn't another way to do it. Shut the fuck up.
yeah,
So that's being a coach. And that's the awesome part is like using these strategies, you got to actually use your brain, which
yeah,
isn't rooted in a paper. Like that's going to have a lot of experience. There's some psychological research to prove certain things, but like, I don't know. It's more of a spectrum approach. And again, I don't know where I was going with that, but I love it. Like that's what I would rather do in a perfect world. Like the walk more thing. It's like, no, get 12,000 steps. We're going to increase flux. You're going to have way more energy availability. You're not going to feel like shit, and you're going to crush the gym, and you're going to be shredded. And you don't have to have this story where I'm fat because I'm a power lifter. It's like, no, motherfucker, you're going to be at a lower body fat percentage at a lower weight class with a higher dots. Like, why the fuck don't you want that? And that's where you can use this stuff. That's what I would rather do 100% of the time. But that's obviously hard. But probably more your audience, right? Like that's again partially where it's helpful in the strength world with those goals. That's where this shit is awesome. That's where nutrition can be part of the process to crushing it, because they'll be it in weight restricted sports. You want to have the highest strength of the weight to strength ratio. No one like before where we came from and the time that we did it was like, well, I'll just get as big as possible, which has its merit. But now all the dot scores are going up because you get these fuckers who are strong, genetically gifted, and not fat.
I know, especially like super heavyweight guys, like they benefit a ton from walking, just because like they're just generally out of shape. They're just generally in shitty shape, and they're super strong, but then they need to get on a fucking ventilator if you get them to do like 8 reps of something. Like if I get like a lifter to do 8 reps on a high bar squat or SSB or something like that, they're like done for a week, and I'm like, that shouldn't happen. Like your like work capacity is shit, and so it's like, we need to get you walking more. We start walking more. Now all of a sudden their aerobic capacity is a little bit better, and then we start pushing volume on accessories, and then from accessories and like doing supersets, shortening rest periods, and all that fun stuff, then we start pushing the work capacity on the barbell specific stuff, even if it is like a variation of the main lift. But then it's like, that's sort of that, or one of the potential progressions is like walking, accessories, then this, and
we come from a time like when I started powerlifting, like geared lifting. I wouldn't say it's at its peak, it was on its downfall, and raw was kind of just getting big. But like walking was not like, people weren't in shape, especially in the geared powerlifting world. It's crazy that like cardio kind of has made its way in. But like you said, you don't even program cardio a lot of times, because honestly, the easiest to recover from is probably walking. And if you looked at the numbers these people are doing, it's probably like 2,000 steps a day, and they're eating like crazy, and they think exercise is enough. Like you're not even exercising that much. You're like, your volume is very low, like comparatively to someone with high volume, and like fuck, you could be so much stronger. And I guess like once they started realizing that, I think like steps and like low, like zone 1, zone 2 cardio kind of has made a resurgence, at least for the people who know, because it works. Like, and again, when you put strength as a motivator, a lot of times you're going to do what the strong people are doing, and they all fucking figured it out.
And I mean, you look at a lot of the West Side guys too, and it's like, regardless of whether you like them or hate them or whatever, it's like they always had a conditioning element in their training. And they're always big on sled drags. They're always big on doing just sort of all sorts of different shit. But at the end of the day, it's like, one thing that I know Louis was huge on is he's like, man, you got to be in shape to get in better shape, like.
And that's where they have research on it. Like that's where the exercise. I think it's only been replicated twice, but like we talked about Eric Helms, and Ben House has talked about this in his new article. But long story short, is in acute bouts of recovery, like if you don't pass that threshold of like I said, 6,000 steps, you don't get as many gains as kind of the moral of the story. So you're leaving results on the table, which could be like I said with Louis, with West Side, that you said they were always doing GPP or GPP phases or rotations and stuff. And like the ideology behind that was like, just be in shape. And that's kind of what 6,000 steps is like, get past the sedentary threshold, because otherwise these exercise bouts, whether it's powerlifting, they're way more acutely stressful, because your body is a piece of shit the rest of the day, and then you just throw a massive bout of exercise. It doesn't want to adapt as much. So why would you leave that rock unturned, as Lowy would say? Is like if there's $1 million when you turn over every stone, why the fuck wouldn't you do that? Because 6,000 steps is literally not that hard, especially for powerlifters. Easiest fucking thing in the world, like you said. It's a half an hour extra a day, dude. Like, that's not much if you want to get stronger. How much percentage? I don't fucking know. But like, why would you leave that unturned? It makes zero sense.
Well, that's the thing. It's like, generally you'll end up feeling better. Generally, you're going to improve your just aerobic fitness. Your ability to recover is generally better. Your body composition is probably going to improve. And then it's like, oh, hey, I am starting to lose weight, and I'm actually not really trying. I'm just sort of losing weight. And they're like, huh, maybe I should think about my body composition. You know what I mean? It's like pretty much always you look at the people who win in competitions and they have the most muscle mass, you know? And so for all those idiots out there who are like, oh, muscle doesn't correlate to strength, it's like, you're not a strong person. I
No.
can guarantee you that. Anyone who says that is not a strong person. It's like, it's the stupidest thing I've ever heard, you know? Always the strongest guys are the biggest guys. It's just always how it works
It's just,
in that weight class.
I love that you brought that up because that's kind of like, again, my background doesn't kind of come through kind of like we're talking about where your job lies. This is like I came from that world. Like I was strong. I did power. I came from all the stupid shit that,
Mhm.
and it's like you said, I totally 100% believe that. It's like if you're not like that strong or that big, like I don't honestly respect your opinion. And I know that I should, but it's just like there is some element to this evidence-based stuff where again, there's a mix here. And again, trying to layer that on, I don't know, but basically like shut the fuck up. It's like you, again, most muscle wins is like, why aren't you trying to extract it? Like I'm
Well,
not listening to the weak people.
evidence-based doesn't even mean evidence-based anymore. Evidence-based
No,
means what research papers have you cited? And it's like, that's not evidence. That's one component of evidence. And if you actually look at what the best available evidence is, it's not always going to be research. It's like, how much research is there on steroids? Oh, fucking none? Because it's not ethical? So who are you going to listen to? It's like, listen to the people who've been doing drugs for decades, you know,
yeah,
and who've done it successfully, kept
outlaw
people
porn.
generally healthy, you know what I mean? It's like that's what you need to look for as well as the research. And so it's like, and then you look at experience and it's like, oh, these guys are all stupid. They don't follow an evidence. It's like, I don't know, man. They produce like 8 Mr. Olympias. I think they know what they're doing. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, genetics and drugs. And it's like, but everyone else has good genetics and also has drugs, but they're not winning at the same like, you know what I mean?
This
It's
is
like,
why I like the walking and the cardio thing is like you can layer that on. Like, let's just say it's genetics and drugs. Like, let's just say that. Okay, the people, all things being equal, like the walking piece or the conditioning piece and doing more volume, you layer that on drugs or not, like it's gonna fucking work. And that's what I'm looking for is like stuff
yeah,
that always works. It's like, yeah, of course drugs are gonna work and they're gonna be strong. They're also big, like all the same arguments apply, but like that's your problem for not doing it. But like again, every stone unturned. And this is
yeah.
where like at least the conditioning piece or the base level thing can have that merit. And the cool thing is it is becoming more evidence-based, which again, if you're looking at all the solutions, which you do, like you run in both crowds. So that's actually probably the best to have both, I guess, ideologies in the same spectrum, but walking is becoming cool again. And I love it because powerlifters are becoming stronger. I don't love powerlifting. I think it peaked in that like big like Oz lift. I was just talking to Stuart Locke about it. I feel like my peak for powerlifting was that big Australian meet where they had the Chris Duffin and all the Gangrene, all the big dogs.
Yeah.
But like now it's different, but at least they're walking and they're stronger. I just don't think it's cool. I just don't think it's cool. In some realms, I thought powerlifting was way cooler when it was West Side and it wasn't about doing cardio and just about getting huge. And then it kind of divulged, it kind of like went to like Pokemon and donuts. But
Yeah.
where like West Side was like
Yeah.
West Side was 8
Anime and shit.
and like fast food, which is like it was just way more. I don't know. I love that. But anyway, I don't know where I was going with this. Nothing to do with walking.
Yeah. No, it was a little bit more raw, a little bit more hardcore and stuff back then for sure. But the funny thing too is like when you look at that, it's like how many world champions did Louis have that were from the same city? It's like 17, 18. It's like that's genetics. Like, I'm sorry, the probability of 17 or 18 world champions, don't quote me on that number, but it's something around there. All coming from like one city. It's like, no. That's a system, that's the environment,
Mhm.
that's what you know, it's like it's you can't just rule that out with like drugs. There's no fucking way, you know? So it's like, you know, they had a decent system. They were like, get as jacked as you can, be in really good shape, and lift super heavy weights. It's like, yeah, that makes sense. You know,
Like all
like,
so strong, dude.
yeah,
Like that's again, if I could layer on like the ideology behind that, but like in terms of like what could fix stuff is like if you have like this is where environment, and if you want to do something useful, this is where environment matters. And again, I don't think most people are going to put themselves by choice into these environments where they're going to be successful. I think that they're going to be stuck where they're at, and that's where interventions that can kind of circumvent that is what I'm going after. If I want to look at that, Louis had them kind of like you have your coaching athletes is like in the micro, we can control a lot of factors and fucking crush it comparatively. And like that's a solution. I just don't think broadly that's the macro solution. And I don't know if I care enough, to be honest. Like I'm not looking to change the world, but I think that again, these things that I'm pushing or trying to push, I think that they're helpful for both the micro and possibly as better interventions for people who aren't going to drastically change their environment. Like that's where solutions like walking or even like lifting or whatever usually have a bigger impact than just fucking not dieting. I'm so happy I tied that in.
No, it's true, and I think it's one of those things that I think there's also an element of ego around it, because like you
100%.
said at the beginning, I remember when I first became a PT and I'd ask, you go through the whole interview process and they're like, well, what kind of exercise have you done? And they're like, well, I go for walks and I do gardening. And I remember just scoffing and being like, you're not exercising. If you're not doing Olympic weightlifting, you're not
Yeah.
exercising. Like, that was my thing. And then now I'm like, when people tell me they're gardening and doing this, I'm like, oh, cool. How long are you doing that for? And it's like, oh, okay, that's actually quite a bit of exercise. Like,
Yeah.
if you actually go and garden for like 2 hours,
100%.
your legs and your back and your fucking, lats can be real sore from bending over and
Yeah.
picking shit up and pulling stuff out of the ground all the time. So, you know, and so I think, yeah, a lot of the times people are just like, oh, walking, that doesn't even do anything. And it's like, okay, well, what do you mean it doesn't do anything? Like, what are we trying to do? And it's sort of when people evaluate a workout by how hard it felt, or like,
Mhm.
are you fried after? It's like, is that the objective? Like, are we looking to just feel super burnt out after a workout, or are we looking to get stronger? Like, what's the actual objective? And so if you miss that, then it's not cool enough. It's like, oh, I'm too cool to walk. I'm too cool to, and it's like, I go for walks every day. I probably go for about 3 walks a day. I
Mhm.
like to put it up because I hit between 10 and 12,000 steps a day.
Yeah.
Um, and it's a good way to like break up my work, because if I just work straight through, I hit a point where I just can't even think. And then one simple task takes me like 2 hours,
Yeah.
you know? Whereas if I get up in the morning, first thing I do, I grab a coffee, go for a walk, come back, get down to some work, eat lunch, go out, walk again, come back, work some more, eat, go out for another walk. And then I come back, work a little bit more, go to training, come back, and then I'm good. It's like I do that. I find I break up my day. I feel way better, especially breaking up my work day like that. Man, it's been a game changer. I'm able to crush out like 4 or 5 times more work just because I have periodic breaks where I get to walk and move my body.
I
You know,
haven't found one example where like walking, like I can pull up like all these like I guess observational stories, but like none of them is like this affected me negatively. Like I think it's you had Pat
they're
on.
always super positive. It's like,
Was it
man,
like
I love it. I feel so good.
yeah, like Thinking Fast and Slow, the book. This is
Yeah.
a pet. If it's a book, but anyways, it's like part of the book is like literally talks about how most of their best ideas came through walking, and like I can sell this narrative in so many cases, but like again, there's so many instances where, and I'm always looking for things that will kill two birds with one stone. Well, with walking, it's like it kills like all the birds. It's just like there's not much downside, and that's where it's just like Jesus Christ, people like make this make this great again, I guess, so to speak. But again, I don't really think it's going to happen. To be completely honest, but maybe I think like this is where podcasts like this and talks like this and kind of the resurgence of it a little bit can at least get people to kind of flip a switch a little bit and like, hey, there's multiple ways you can use this thing. Like,
Mm.
probably should utilize it, but really what it comes down to is like just be more active, which is like so silly that we have to go down this rabbit hole now to convince people because our society has changed so drastically that they don't do anything hard. And now walking is a hard thing to do because like what? But I think that is more the problem, and anything to kind of change that narrative is helpful in my opinion. I guess on the macro.
Yeah. Well, a lot of it too is just people have become kind of like coddled.
Yeah,
you
it's
know?
so easy to
Like,
be a human right now. Like even
like,
though there's like a lot of like diversity and like I guess different spectrums of this, but generally we live pretty fucking well. Like
yeah.
at least
If
where we're
you live
from.
in America, for sure,
Yeah.
it's like, people, yeah, I don't know. I'll hear about problems, or like I'll hear about, because even I have some friends who are coaches who have been in it for like maybe 2 years now, so quite new. And I'll see some of the content that they're posting, and it's very like, and you just need to do what feels right to your body. And I'm like, man, you know what feels right to someone who's overweight? Eating more food and not exercising.
Yeah.
That's what feels right. You know what doesn't feel right? Going into a gym, feeling incredibly uncomfortable, pushing hard, having your muscles burn and then be sore for the next, like that doesn't feel good. You know what I mean? And it's like, but sometimes you just have to do shit that doesn't feel good, and that's just the way that it is, you
Yeah.
know? Like, does going to work every day and getting up early feel good? No, but you do it. Would you be able to make excuses about, oh, I just emotionally, I just am not feeling like this is the right thing for me today, so I'm just not going to work. I hope you understand. It's gonna be like, cool, you're fired. Get the fuck out of here. You know what I mean? Like, everyone has the time and the dedication to go to work, to take care of their kids, to do all this stuff. But then when it comes to themselves, all of a sudden that doesn't apply. It's like, I don't buy it. I just don't buy it, you know?
Yeah, like
And
I truthfully like, and again, like personally, like I do believe that. I understand the other side of it. Like I 100% I deal with like so many general populations, and I believe that they believe
yeah,
it's hard. And there is some situations where like I get it, but like I guess that's your job as a coach to kind of figure out how do you get them to snap out of it, because ideologically I believe that everyone has the time for the most. I feel like they can make it work. There's a cost benefit analysis, but I think a lot of the upside is generally going to be positive. I think there's very few negatives that they can't include it. As a coach, how do you do that? That's again for your coaching practice. Like I know how I do it, and I'm not the expert that's going to tell people how do you convince people to do it. All I'm going to tell you is that the highest payoff, the highest leverage piece is probably that fucking thing. And I believe that most people can fucking do it. Everyone's pushback is a bunch of bullshit a lot of times. A big one, kind of similar to the post I had yesterday about the 2 to 3 times, but I had one about like I think like 12,000 to 10,000 steps is like probably the best place to be personally. Like that's what I think. And then they're like, well, I have kids and do this and yada yada yada. And I'm like, I have kids. Like it looks like instead of like sitting on the couch watching your kids play, you go play with them. Like I can list off a million fucking examples of things that you could do. Just tell me you want ideas. I'll give you 100, because I don't believe in the narrative that you can't do it. Even with people with kids, even with people at the job, go for a walk. Like you said, buy a walking treadmill. You know what? Get an hour less sleep. Like, does that suck? Yeah. Like, there's certain you can fucking figure it out. Is what I'm saying. Watch less TV.
yeah.
I think it'll be definitely hard though. And that's not what I'm arguing, is that it's not hard. It's just that you can fucking do it. And that's the difference. I think when you come off like, oh, like you have the time, blah, 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 blah. It's like, yeah, I believe they do, but I also believe it's hard. Both of those things can exist. It still needs to fucking happen.
100%.
Yeah.
I'm just looking for a post that I made on Instagram, because like I started doing this kind of satirical post just because
I went over well.
huh?
Did you finish it? I was like, that probably went over well.
Oh, no, they do actually. They're like some of my
Yep.
most popular posts now. Because like, so who does a great job of this? I think his name's Boston Lloyd, the
Oh,
Be a Man guy.
which isn't Boston Lloyd didn't he die?
Oh, maybe I'm just making up names then.
He's a
He's
steroid
I
guy.
thought
Like,
that was his name. He's the guy who's like, have a heart attack? Don't call an ambulance. Die like a man, or just die. Be a man, or something like that. You know?
oh, that guy. Yeah,
Like,
I know exactly. Like,
yeah, yeah. So I started doing like these satirical posts that are like mostly satire, but sometimes they actually have like a little bit of truth to them. Um, and I'll like make a satirical post, and then I'll like actually kind of expand in the caption. I'm like, okay, here's what's actually going on. And I think one of the posts was like, um, struggling to stay consistent with your diet in the gym. I was like, end the struggle, just quit, or something like that. And that one actually got shared a ton. It was more clever and quippy than that, but it's just like people get surprised by the fact that it's different. And it's like, did you expect it to be easy? You know what I mean? Like, I'm like, when you go to university, are you like, oh, this is gonna be a breeze? When you start a new job, are you expecting it to be a breeze? Or do you expect a learning curve? When you get into a relationship, do you expect it to be a breeze? Like, nothing worthwhile is ever easy. And so when people are like, but it's hard, I'm like, what's your point? Like, so is that your argument? Like, is there anything like what's hard about it? You know? Like, oh well, it's da, da, da. And then really quickly, like if you just ask that follow-up question, 9 times out of 10, they're just like, yeah, I just don't want to do it. And then at that point, you're like, all right, well then this might not be for you. You know? I mean, it's incredibly rare that I actually meet someone who's
well,
actually
and
like
the
that.
problem is, and like this is where I understand the dynamics of building relationships and like different messaging. And like obviously we know that messaging doesn't work for a lot of people, but I think that this is where like people, if we're on the same page on like what works, can have vastly different message with the same goal. They could probably reach more people. But again, I think that ego gets involved and yada yada yada. But it's like I'm on the spectrum as much as I hate it. Like it's supposed to be hard and you should figure it out. Now, is that going to connect with everyone? No, but like at this point, I don't care because I don't. It's not my goal to change the world. It's like I want to give what people. If people want to listen to what I have to say and they want help from me, that's what I'm going to give them, and at least it's consistent, I guess.
Yeah.
Could I do the other route? Yeah, and I do 100% sometimes. Like I'm a softie sometimes too, but it's like that's where I don't think some people are equipped, especially people that are new to this industry, with dealing with that because they don't have the experience to like have those multiple different conversations to get to the same point. They'll have one hammer, and I don't know where I'm basically going with this. You need to approach it with multiple ways, but foundationally, I do believe everyone can figure out a way to do it. That's how you get them to do it. Again, that's the magic. Call me when you figure out how to fix that.
Yeah, but that's exactly like you said. That's just coaching skills, right?
It's just
Like, I'm talking right now, and it probably sounds like I'm super harsh coach, but if you were to listen to like my video check-ins, it's not how it sounds at all.
Exactly.
It's
You probably the softy. I bet.
it's very heavy communication. It's like Paul O'Neill.
Yeah, I was gonna. He was.
You never heard him coach? That's
Oh, yeah.
almost exactly how I coach.
Except
He's
for
just like
Paul did it before. I was actually coached by Paul. Paul got me to a 440 bench at 220. So I'll shout out to Paul. We used to be on 1020 Life together. Anyways, Paul is a very big dick on text.
Yeah.
He's also a very big softie when you talk to him. But
Yeah.
I think that I like that mix. Like that's kind of where my background is in terms of like what I think is effective coaching. Obviously not for everyone, but like that's if I was to aspire to be something, it would be like that. Like hard when I need to be, but I also like. But he's probably more hard than I am. Like he said some mean things to me.
It's funny because he's the exact opposite. Like I always see him trolling his clients, and then because I was I'm actually still getting coaching from him on nutrition, right?
Yeah.
And
He's probably changed a lot.
Huh?
He's probably changed a lot from then.
I think it's because I'm like very hard on myself.
Yeah.
But he's like, okay, we need to balance this out a little bit, But that's exactly my point, right? Is like he'll look at the client and be like, what does the client need?
Yeah.
What communication, what messaging, how do I get through to them? What sort of progression strategy is going to fit with them? And then he just talks to them. And it's like, so ultimately, like that's that coaching relationship that you're talking about, where it's like, with one person, you might have to be like, hey, shut the fuck up, get on the fucking treadmill, literally swearing at them. And that's how to get the most out of that athlete. Another person might be like, hey, you know what? Honestly, don't worry about it. Just chalk it off as a bad day and just get back on. No big deal. And then we'd be like, oh my God, I thought you were going to be so mean. And you're like, no, don't worry about it. And it sounds like coddling, but that's actually what they need, because they're just like way too brutal on themselves. And you just kind of have to shoot straight with them and sort of bring both people back into balance a little bit. But those are like different coaching paradigms, but that's just good communication.
That's why I like conversations like this, because it ends up being like we can talk about the evidence, we talk about observational, but again, when it comes to rubber meets the road, a lot of times the people who are the most successful, or even on these podcasts or whatever, they're the ones with the experience to then apply some of this stuff. And I guess this is where like the dichotomy between these two worlds is on both sides. I think they're fucking stupid a lot of times. And that's why there's certain people I listen to, right, who I know have experience either coaching or building products or something. But they're not just like weak, small people talking about this or talking about it and haven't coached the fucking person in their life. Like, again, I take it with I just take it with a grain of salt a lot of times, because again, you build that, I guess, eye for who are you going to trust and follow over time. And we probably both have made mistakes. I've listened to a lot of people I probably shouldn't have, right? And I've looked at a lot of information and I'm getting a better eye for that. But that's kind of where, again, as a fitness professional, you kind of got to have that journey on your own. But I would probably fall somewhere in the middle if I was to give advice on this shit. Is like, don't listen to the Walkmore King, or you know what I mean, or like even this podcast. It's just like you have to look at a lot of things and build your own model in some regard. I guess that's where Paul lands out. Someone who I would aspire to in terms of coaching style is like that's kind of what you want to see. Is like he has multiple tools and multiple experiences to get the result a lot of times. And he would probably say he's not qualified to deal with some people. And that's where, again, people like my partner deal with a lot of emotional eating stuff. This whole conversation doesn't work for that fucking crowd. You know what I mean? And so there's also that end, which we didn't talk about, but I'm not here to solve all the world's problems, especially when, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. And that's, it's funny too, actually, this is kind of a little bit of a tangent, but you look at where, people will see a message and they're like, what about this? And it's like, dude, I'm a powerlifting coach. I don't coach, people with eating disorders. Like you'll just see like, and it's like, yeah, but what if? And it's like, dude, that's not my demographic. Like why don't you talk a little bit more aggressively to catch powerlifters? It's like, well, that's not my, it's like, well, then shut the fuck up. Like that's exactly the point. It's like you go like, if I went to like Mike Tasher's page and he started talking about intuitive eating, I'd be like, what's going on? Like, what are you doing? I'd be really confused about what it is that he actually did. But you look at people and like they end up just staying in their lane, and those are the people who do really well. And like to your point earlier about sort of that amalgamation of experience and like producing athletes and education. Like, you look at someone like Eric Helms, you look at someone like Paul O'Neill, you look at someone like Mike T. And I kind of expand the definition of education
Mhm.
to be like not just what do you know research wise, but it's like what do you know? Like what do you actually know? What can you communicate? Like what's your actual understanding of these things? And if you can communicate it effectively, then that's also education, even if it is informal in my mind.
Yeah.
And like these guys are like really well spoken, they're educated, they are, they have the results. So Eric was a professional bodybuilder, and then Mike T was a high level powerlifter, Paul was a high level powerlifter. And it's like all of them have generated like really awesome athletes. And so it's like they have the education, they've done it themselves, and they're producing athletes. It's like if you have all those three things, you're probably a pretty damn good coach.
It's probably pretty helpful to listen to that person. And
Yeah,
like
yeah.
for the thing that they're good at too. Like you said, if Mike T started talking about intuitive eating, I would probably listen to him based on his background, but I think it would end real quick.
Yeah, yeah. No, I mean that was just sort of an example, right? Of
No,
like
but it's a good
someone,
example. Like,
yeah,
it's like there is levels to this stuff, and like at this point, you're not going to come to me for strength coaching or programming. Like I fucking changed. I don't even know if I changed my lane, but I landed in my lane. But again, uh, mine's a little bit more broad. But that's kind of why you kind of have to, as a fitness professional, figure out kind of where you're going to go. And again, that takes some time. And like Paul hasn't necessarily changed his lane, so to speak. But Paul does dieting, and he talks about walking and all this shit too. We didn't talk about that before. We were both fucking let's get huge and lift lots of weights. And so again, I also respect people like that who evolve as things do change and as they do learn. And that's who I kind of look up to. Like Chris Duffin would be a perfect example. Like there's so many examples of people who have changed and have added and have even admitted they were wrong. And that's where it's kind of cool, I guess. I'm waiting to admit that I'm wrong about walking. And I'm also willing to admit like a lot of these people would be willing to be wrong. And that's where it's nice. That's kind of where I like to live, so to speak. Like
I
kind of
don't
in
see how you could be wrong about walking though, because it's just a tool.
correct. I
I
could be
mean,
told.
that, that
Yeah.
that's the only claim as far as I'm aware. It's just like, hey, walking is a useful tool. You should probably use it. It's like, yeah.
My main, I think like I was talking about Eric and like I, I'm biased, obviously, completely biased, but like my question I would want answered is like, could I think high flux, like getting higher in flux, whether that's through exercise or through meat and getting food up, with all the other stuff we talk about diet with food quality, but like I think high flux is probably better overall for our current environment for people. Like I think if they can figure out a way, and most of the times I think input's going to be around like for males 3,200 calories ish, right? I'm talking about general population, not strength athletes. And for women, it's going to be somewhere around 1,900 calories, 2,000 calories. I think if they can get their output up and more or less increase flux, because I think that their eating habits are going to remain the same. I think it's a better way of doing it, 100%. Because I think everything else is about how do you get the people to be low flux. And I can't wait for more research to kind of stem from, I guess, more specifically high flux dieting and longevity. Because all the studies that I look at on weight loss maintaining end up looking like high flux to me, like and or the population studies of the like the some of the population studies looks like high flux to me outside of the Hadza. And so again,
Yeah, well, all the successful ones, or the majority of the successful ones, include some sort of exercise-based component.
right. And it's usually at that and neat, and then calories being a little higher. And I'm like, they're not high flux studies, but I'm looking at that through a high flux lens. I'm like, oh fuck, like I can't wait for there to be more research, and we'll be waiting, fuck forever at this point. So you just kind of have to do what you gotta do. And yeah,
I mean, you look at different environments, even like different cultures, and I mean, we were talking about Spain earlier.
Mhm.
It's not really a secret. It's not really a shocker. Like, so I gave my car to my sister when I moved to Toronto,
Yeah.
and now that I'm back here, I've just been walking everywhere, um, and it's like it's fucking annoying at times for sure, but I'm way more active.
100%.
So, so it's like, am I telling people to give up their car? No, but there's little things that you can do, like, I don't know, maybe bike to work if it's close, or bike once a week, or just go for a walk. I don't know. Just like just finding different ways to fit activity in generally, I think is going to be a pretty good idea. And if you can do it in ways that are pretty enjoyable, like, you talked about multitasking earlier. I really like to listen to lectures. So
Mhm.
I'm a big economics buff. Like, I just find it so incredibly interesting. I also really like physics, but I'm not into physics in the way that I'm into economics. I think physics is just really interesting, but I don't understand half of it,
Yeah.
but like I remember when I heard Richard Feynman. Do you know who he is? It's like a
No.
famous physicist. He's dead now, but he just super, super brilliant. He has this like huge lecture series. It's free on YouTube. And so I'll just like sometimes listen to it. And I remember when I first got interested in physics, it was like, I remember finding out that like time was relative to motion, and that if there was no motion, time would stop. And I was like, wait, what? Like, what the fuck? Like, you hear that and you're like, oh, that's kind of cool. And I'm like, wait, no, like I literally can't comprehend that. Like it's so difficult. And then just little cool things like the reason why ice is slippery is because when you stand on it, it compresses it back into fluid and you get this layer of viscosity, and that's why it's slippery. And it's like, oh wow, because ice expands when it's cold, which is a really unique property because normally things shrink and all this other stuff. And so it's like little things like that that kind of explain the way the world works. I just find it so interesting. And so it's like I can go out for a walk, throw on a fucking lecture, and I can be like, wow, that's really cool. I did not know that. That's super interesting. And so it's like, or you can listen to a podcast, or you can just jam out and listen to music and use that as kind of a relaxation time.
I
And
have to do this before we end. Like, did you see it? Because it's physicist, super interesting to me. I'm like not as well versed, but I can't remember which documentary it was on Netflix, but and I don't know. One of the main guys is dead now, but it was like the astrophysicist lining up the satellites to get the picture of the black hole, and it was like basically a documentary on that. That's where I realized throughout the documentary how fucking deep physics can go and how fucked it is and how brilliant some people are, that like that made me realize that like I don't know shit.
yeah, yeah.
Because I was
Me
trying to
too.
conceptualize how the black hole worked, and like they had like fucking they had to coordinate a bunch of satellites, which takes incredible amounts of work and data stored on hard drives to like get in binary the picture of the black hole, and like just conceptually couldn't figure it out. Then like kind of all these physicists trying to theorize, like they and realizing that they don't even know the answers, and there's like walls of like fucking algorithms and stuff, and they're like, yeah, we'll tweak this, we'll do this. I'm like, man, there's a whole different level. This is just a different level, and like I don't
Oh,
know anything, and we're bitching about calorie deficits, and like
yeah.
like the
It's
greatest minds in the world don't even give a shit about this. Like there's again,
yeah,
there's levels to this evidence-based stuff. Like it's just not even
yeah.
funny.
You're like, I want a six pack, and you're like, how can we colonize Mars? It's like these are two very different conversations.
It's like we're actually very low level
Yeah.
intellect here, and like not that I want to be that person. I actually like my life, but like damn, like there's some brilliant people out there, and they're usually in physics or physicists or astrophysics because like that shit matters because they're looking at like basically how do I progress and prolong the human race as long as possible. Like that's the real shit, and like we're not even. I guess we're kind of doing that a little bit. How do you live longer? But that's another podcast
Yeah.
altogether.
Yeah. So, well, I guess I'm going to open up my new economics and physics podcast.
Yeah. Go for a walk.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, okay, that was a fairly informal chat about walking and just a
Yeah.
whole host of other shit. I don't even know. We just kind of talked about a lot of stuff, but it was an awesome conversation. Really, really fun connecting. It's been a minute since we've actually chatted, so it was good to reconnect. So where can people find you, Dean?
Mine's pretty simple. I don't even want to like say it. I like the one at walk.more.king. Usually Instagram's where I spend most of my time. Also work with Compound Performance, and so I do now Jeb Stewart Johnston. We do a section on nutrition for there, and we also do education. Um, with the Compound Performance for nutrition. And then I also work at Stronger You. So if you want to work with me as a client, I'm at Stronger You. Just ask for me. And that's pretty much it. Basically, look at my Instagram, go to Compound Performance, and you'll figure out something there.
Awesome, man. So all that stuff's going to be linked up in the show notes, guys. Make sure you give him a follow. Make sure you check out Compound You.
Compound Performance. I don't even know they've changed it. I think it's
sorry. I don't know. Anyways, it's going to be linked up in the show notes, guys. Make sure you go check them out. Thanks for coming on, man.
Thanks, buddy.